The merciless Arizona sun beat down on Tombstone's dusty main street as Jack Lonely Mercer guided his weathered horse through the crowded thoroughfare. At 43, Jack carried the weight of 1,000 regrets in his steel-gray eyes and the scars of countless battles etched into his weathered face. His black hat sat low, casting shadows that seemed to follow him like ghosts from his past. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick, and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story now." "Easy, Thunder," Jack murmured to his faithful stallion, patting the horse's neck as they approached the town square. The commotion ahead caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around a makeshift wooden platform where a portly man in a worn suit was shouting over the noise. "Ladies and gentlemen of Tombstone," bellowed Silas Crow, the town's most notorious auctioneer. "Today we have fine specimens of young labor, strong backs, willing hands, and minds ready for molding." Jack's jaw tightened as he realized what was happening. A child auction. He'd heard whispers of such despicable practices in the more lawless territories, but seeing it firsthand made his blood boil. On the platform stood a line of boys, ranging from 8 to 15 years old, their faces a mixture of fear, defiance, and resignation. "Now, who'll start the bidding for this fine young man?" Crow gestured toward a tall, lanky boy with defiant green eyes. 14 years old, strong as an ox. $50, shouted a gruff voice from the crowd. 60, called another. Jack dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dusty ground. He pushed through the crowd, his imposing 6-foot frame parting the sea of onlookers like Moses parting the Red Sea. Something about this whole scene felt wrong, more wrong than usual. "Sold to Jeremiah Hawks for $75, Crow announced, and Jack watched as the boy was led away by a cruel-looking man with tobacco-stained teeth. "Next up," Crow continued, "we have a special case. This boy here has been difficult to place. Silent as a tomb, this one. But look at those hands. Perfect for detail work." Jack's attention snapped to the small figure being pushed forward. The boy couldn't be more than 10 years old, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that held secrets far too heavy for someone so young. What struck Jack most was the child's posture, proud despite his circumstances, like a caged wolf refusing to be broken. "He don't speak much," Crow announced with a nervous laugh, "but that might be a blessing for some of you. Who'll start at $20? "20, called out Martha Hendricks, the stern-faced woman who ran the local boarding house with an iron fist. "25, shouted Big Pete Morrison, a man known for working children to the bone in his copper mine. Jack felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Protection. The need to shield someone vulnerable from the cruelties of the world. He thought of his sister Abigail, lost to him for over a decade, and how she would have reacted to seeing a child in such circumstances. $30, Martha called out, her voice sharp with determination. 40, Big Pete countered, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of cheap labor. The boy's gaze swept across the crowd and locked with Jack's. In that moment, Jack saw something that made his heart skip, a flash of intelligence, of hope, of desperate pleading. The child's small hand moved to his chest, clutching something beneath his tattered shirt. $50, Jack heard himself call out, his voice cutting through the crowd like a knife. The crowd turned to look at the newcomer. Crow's eyes lit up with greed. $50 from the gentleman in black. Do I hear 60? Big Pete scowled. 60! Jack stepped closer to the platform, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt .45. $100! A collective gasp rose from the crowd. $100 was more than most men in Tombstone made in 3 months. $100! Crow repeated, his voice cracking with excitement. Going once, going twice. Big Pete opened his mouth to bid again, but something in Jack's cold stare made him think better of it. The man stepped back, muttering under his breath. Sold to the gentleman for $100. As Jack approached the platform to claim the boy, he noticed Crow's nervous demeanor. The auctioneer kept glancing toward a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the crowd, a tall man in an expensive coat who seemed to be watching the proceedings with unusual interest. "Here's your boy, mister," Crow said, practically shoving the child toward Jack. "No returns, no guarantees. What's done is done." Jack knelt down to the boy's level, his voice gentle despite his intimidating appearance. "What's your name, son?" The boy remained silent, but his eyes studied Jack with the wariness of someone who had learned not to trust easily. Jack noticed the child's hand still clutched something at his chest. "It's all right," Jack said softly. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to, but you're safe now. I give you my word." As they walked away from the platform, Jack caught sight of the mysterious figure in the expensive coat melting back into the crowd. Something about the man's hasty retreat set off alarm bells in Jack's mind. "Come on, boy," Jack said, lifting the child onto Thunder's back before mounting behind him. "Let's get you some food and clean clothes." As they rode toward the Tombstone Hotel, Jack felt the boy's small body trembling against his chest. Whether from fear, relief, or something else entirely, Jack couldn't tell, but he was determined to find out. "You know," Jack said as they rode, "I had a sister once. Abigail was her name. She was about your age when she first learned to ride. Fearless as they come, that girl was." The boy's body went rigid at the mention of Abigail's name, and Jack felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the desert wind. What had he gotten himself into? The Tombstone Hotel's dining room buzzed with the usual evening crowd of miners, gamblers, and drifters when Jack and the boy entered. Conversations died down as curious eyes followed the unlikely pair to a corner table. Jack had cleaned the boy up as best he could, but the child's haunted expression remained unchanged. "2 plates of beef stew and cornbread," Jack told the waitress, a kind-faced woman named Sally who'd been working the hotel for years. "Coming right up, Jack," Sally replied, her eyes soft with sympathy as she looked at the boy. "And maybe some milk for the little one?" The boy nodded slightly, the first real response Jack had gotten from him all afternoon. As they waited for their food, Jack studied the child more carefully. Despite the dirt and worn clothes, there was something refined about the boy's features. His hands, though small, showed calluses that spoke of hard work, but his posture suggested he'd been raised with manners. "Listen, son," Jack said gently. "I know you've been through hell, but if we're going to figure this out together, I need to know something about you. Anything at all." The boy's hand moved to his chest again, that same protective gesture Jack had noticed at the auction. This time, Jack saw a faint outline beneath the fabric, something small and round. "What's that you're holding?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy's eyes darted around the room, checking for eavesdroppers. Slowly, he reached into his shirt and pulled out a tarnished silver locket on a thin chain. Jack's heart stopped. He knew that locket. With trembling hands, Jack reached across the table. "May I?" The boy hesitated, then placed the locket in Jack's palm. The metal was warm from being held close to the child's heart. Jack's fingers found the tiny clasp, and the locket opened with a soft click. Inside was a miniature photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, Abigail, his sister, exactly as she'd looked 15 years ago when she was 19 and full of dreams. "Dear God," Jack whispered, his voice breaking. "Where did you get this?" The boy's lips moved, forming words so quiet Jack had to lean forward to hear them. My mama gave it to me before they took her away." Jack's world tilted on its axis. This boy, this child he'd rescued on impulse, was his nephew, Abigail's son. "What's your name?" Jack asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Thomas," the boy whispered. "Thomas Mercer." Mercer. Abigail had kept their family name. "Thomas," Jack repeated, testing the name. "How old are you, son?" 10, I think. Mama said I was born in the spring of 76. Jack's mind raced. That would mean Abigail had been 20 when Thomas was born. But where had she been all these years, and why had she given up her son? Thomas, I need you to tell me everything you remember about your mama. Can you do that? The boy nodded, his small voice growing stronger as he spoke. Mama was beautiful. She had long brown hair and she sang to me every night. We lived in a little house outside of Tucson with a man she called Papa Frank, but he wasn't my real papa. Jack's jaw clenched. What happened to Papa Frank? He got sick and died when I was 8. After that, everything changed. Mama started crying all the time, and then the bad men came. What bad men? Thomas's eyes filled with tears. They said Mama owed them money. They said Papa Frank had borrowed from them and now Mama had to pay. But we didn't have any money. Jack felt rage building in his chest like a wildfire. What did they do? They took Mama away, said she had to work for them until the debt was paid. They were going to take me too, but Mama begged them to let me go. She gave me the locket and told me to never let anyone take it from me. How long ago was this? 2 years. Maybe more. I tried to find her, but they kept moving me around. Different houses, different people. Some were mean. Some were just empty inside. Jack reached across the table and gently took Thomas's small hand in his weathered one. Thomas, I'm your uncle. Your mama is my sister. I've been looking for her for 15 years. Thomas's eyes widened. Your Uncle Jack? Mama told me stories about you. She said you were the bravest cowboy in all of Arizona. A bitter laugh escaped Jack's lips. I don't know about brave, son. If I was brave, I would have found her sooner. She said you had a fight and that's why you couldn't find each other. But she always said you'd come for us someday. Jack's heart shattered and mended itself in the same moment. Abigail had kept faith in him even after all these years. Do you remember anything about the men who took your mama? Names, faces, anything that might help us find her? Thomas nodded eagerly. The leader had a scar right here. He traced a line from his left ear to his jaw. And he wore a ring with a snake on it. The others called him Boss Dalton. Jack's blood ran cold. Marcus Dalton. He should have known. Dalton ran the most ruthless criminal organization in the Arizona Territory, dealing in everything from cattle rustling to human trafficking. If Dalton had Abigail, she was in more danger than Jack had imagined. Thomas, this is very important. Did you ever hear them mention where they were taking your mama? I heard them talking about a place called The Garden. They said it was where the pretty ladies worked. Jack's stomach turned. The Garden was Dalton's most infamous establishment, a brothel and gambling den hidden somewhere in the Dragoon Mountains. It was said that women who went to the Garden were never seen again. Uncle Jack? Thomas's small voice broke through Jack's dark thoughts. Are we going to find Mama? Jack looked into his nephew's hopeful eyes and made a promise that would either save them all or get them killed. Yes, Thomas. We're going to find her, and we're going to bring her home. As if summoned by their conversation, a shadow fell across their table. Jack looked up to see a familiar figure, the same well-dressed man who had been watching the auction earlier. Excuse me, gentlemen, the man said in a smooth, cultured voice. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private? Jack's hand moved instinctively to his gun. And you are? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Someone who knows where Abigail Mercer is, and someone who can help you get her back, for the right price. The stranger led Jack and Thomas to a private room above the hotel's saloon, his expensive boots clicking against the wooden stairs with measured precision. Jack kept one hand on Thomas's shoulder and the other near his Colt, every instinct screaming danger. Please, sit. The man gestured to 2 chairs facing a small table. He remained standing, positioning himself between them and the door. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Vincent Ashford, and I represent certain business interests in this territory. Jack's eyes narrowed. What kind of business interests? Ashford smiled that cold smile again. The kind that knows Marcus Dalton's operation better than anyone else, including the current whereabouts of your sister. You work for Dalton, Jack stated, his voice flat and dangerous. I prefer to think of myself as an independent contractor. Dalton and I have had our differences recently, which is why I'm willing to help you. Thomas pressed closer to Jack, his small hand gripping his uncle's arm. Jack could feel the boy trembling. What do you want? Jack asked. Ashford reached into his coat, moving slowly to avoid triggering Jack's defensive instincts. He pulled out a photograph and placed it on the table. This was taken 3 weeks ago. Jack's heart stopped. The photograph showed a woman in an elegant but revealing dress, standing in what appeared to be an ornate parlor. Despite the years and the obvious hardships, Jack recognized his sister immediately. Abigail was alive, but the spark in her eyes had dimmed to barely glowing embers. "Where is this?" Jack's voice was barely controlled fury. "The garden, as your nephew correctly identified. It's Dalton's crown jewel, hidden in a box canyon about 30 miles northeast of here. Heavily guarded, nearly impossible to find without a guide. And you're offering to be that guide? For a price?" Ashford's eyes glittered with greed. $50,000. Jack laughed bitterly. "I don't have $50,000. I don't have $50. But you have something much more valuable." Ashford's gaze shifted to Thomas. "You have the boy." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Jack's hand moved to his gun. "Explain yourself. Carefully. The boy is worth more than you know, Mr. Mercer. You see, Abigail didn't just accumulate debt through her late husband's gambling. She stole something from Dalton. Something very valuable. A ledger containing the names and locations of every corrupt official, every paid-off lawman, every dirty deal in the territory." Jack's mind raced. "And Dalton thinks Thomas knows where it is." "Dalton knows the boy knows. Abigail hid the ledger before she was captured, and she told Thomas where to find it. That's why the boy has been moved around so much. Dalton's been trying to get his hands on him for 2 years. Thomas looked up at Jack with wide, frightened eyes. "Uncle Jack, I don't know about any ledger." Ashford chuckled. "Of course you don't, boy. Your mother was too smart to tell you directly, but she left you clues, didn't she? In the stories she told you? In the songs she sang?" Jack saw recognition flicker in Thomas's eyes. The boy did know something. "Here's my proposition," Ashford continued. "You give me the boy for 24 hours. I'll extract the information about the ledger's location. In return, I'll not only tell you exactly where to find the garden, but I'll provide you with detailed intelligence about the guards, the layout, everything you need to get your sister out alive." "Absolutely not." Jack's voice was steel. "I won't trade one family member for another. Then your sister dies in that place, and the boy dies anyway when Dalton's men eventually track him down. Because they will track him down, Mr. Mercer. The auction today wasn't random. It was a trap. Dalton knew you were in town, knew you'd see the boy and recognize something familiar." Jack's blood chilled. How could he know that? "Because someone told him you were coming. Someone who's been watching you for a very long time." Before Jack could respond, the door burst open. Sheriff William Clanton, brother to the infamous Ike Clanton, stood in the doorway with 2 deputies, their guns drawn. "Well, well," Clanton drawled, his corrupt smile revealing gold teeth. "Jack Mercer, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of that boy." "Kidnapping?" Jack stood slowly, his hands visible but ready to move. "I bought him legally at a public auction." "Auction was illegal," Clanton replied. "Territory law says all orphaned children must go through proper channels. That boy belongs in the territorial orphanage in Phoenix." Jack realized the trap had been sprung perfectly. If he went to jail, Thomas would be taken to Phoenix, straight into Dalton's waiting hands. "There's another way," Ashford said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Sheriff Clanton, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Mercer here is actually working with me to return the boy to his proper guardians." Clanton's eyes narrowed with suspicion and greed. "That so?" Ashford reached into his coat again and pulled out a thick envelope. "I think you'll find the paperwork is all in order." Clanton opened the envelope, and Jack caught a glimpse of cash mixed with official-looking documents. The sheriff's demeanor changed immediately. "Well, I suppose if the paperwork's in order," Clanton pocketed the envelope. "But I'll be keeping an eye on you, Mercer. One wrong move and you'll be in my jail." After the sheriff and his men left, Ashford turned back to Jack with a satisfied expression. "You see, I can be quite useful. But my offer stands. The boy for the information about your sister." Jack looked down at Thomas, who was staring up at him with absolute trust. In that moment, Jack made a decision that would either save them all or damn them forever. "I have a counter-proposal," Jack said. "I'll find the ledger myself with Thomas's help, but we do it together, as a family. Once I have the ledger, I'll trade it to you for the information about the garden. And if you can't find it, then you get the boy anyway. But you give me 48 hours first." Ashford considered this, his calculating mind weighing the odds. 48 hours, but I'll be watching you every step of the way. And if you try to run, we won't run, Jack said firmly. We're going to end this. As Ashford left, Jack knelt down beside Thomas. "Son, I need you to think very carefully about the stories your mama told you, about hiding places, about special spots that were important to her. Can you do that?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "Uncle Jack, are we really going to save Mama?" Jack pulled his nephew into a fierce hug. "I promise you, Thomas, we're going to bring her home or die trying." Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert sky, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Dawn broke over Tombstone with the promise of scorching heat as Jack and Thomas prepared for what could be their final journey together. They had spent the night piecing together Abigail's hidden messages, and Thomas had finally remembered the crucial detail, a song his mother used to sing about a silver angel watching over the old oak tree. Jack knew exactly where that was. "The old Mercer homestead," Jack murmured as he saddled Thunder. "She hid it at our childhood home." The abandoned property lay 15 miles south of Tombstone, a place Jack hadn't visited since the day he'd left home 15 years ago after the bitter fight with his father. The same fight that had driven Abigail away. "Uncle Jack," Thomas said as they rode through the desert morning. "Mama used to say you and her had a big fight. What happened?" Jack was quiet for a long moment, the weight of old guilt heavy on his shoulders. "Your mama fell in love with a man our father didn't approve of. Frank Morrison. Your papa, Frank. I sided with our father. Told her she was making a mistake, that Frank would only bring her trouble. But you were wrong. I was young and stupid and thought I knew what was best for everyone. When Abigail left with Frank, I was too proud to go after her. Too proud to apologize." Jack's voice cracked. "I've regretted it every day since." They found the homestead exactly as Jack remembered it, a weathered house with a collapsed roof and an ancient oak tree standing sentinel in the front yard. Beneath the tree, partially hidden by overgrown grass, was a small stone marker. "Here lies Patch's beloved dog and faithful friend," Thomas read aloud. "Is this it?" Jack nodded, pulling out his knife to dig around the marker. 6 inches down, his blade struck something hard. A small metal box wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside the box was a leather-bound ledger filled with names, dates, and amounts that would destroy half the territorial government if made public, and tucked inside the front cover was a letter in Abigail's handwriting. "My dearest Jack," Jack read aloud, his voice trembling. "If you're reading this, then Thomas found you as I always knew he would. I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for not reaching out, for the years we lost. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped believing that you would come for us when we needed you most. The man who has me now is dangerous, but I've hidden evidence that can destroy him. Use it wisely. Save our boy. Save yourself. Don't try to save me. I'm already lost. Your loving sister, Abigail." "She's not lost," Thomas cried out, tears streaming down his face. "We can save her! We have to!" Jack folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt, right next to his heart. "You're right, son. We're going to save her." But as they rode back toward Tombstone, Jack spotted dust clouds on the horizon, riders approaching fast. Too many riders. "Thomas, hold on tight!" Jack commanded, spurring Thunder into a gallop. The chase was brutal and relentless. Dalton's men, led by the scarred man Thomas had described, pursued them across the desert with murderous intent. Jack's superior horsemanship and Thunder's endurance kept them ahead, but barely. They reached Tombstone just as the sun was setting, racing through the streets toward the hotel where Ashford waited. But instead of safety, they found chaos. The hotel was surrounded by armed men, and Ashford stood in the street with a satisfied smile. Beside him, Sheriff Clanton held a smoking gun pointed at the sky. "Mr. Mercer," Ashford called out, "I'm afraid our deal has changed. You see, I've already recovered the ledger from your saddlebags while you were gone." Jack's hand went to his saddlebags. Empty. Ashford's men had been following them the entire time. "But I'm a man of my word," Ashford continued. "I promised you information about the garden, and you shall have it. Your sister is indeed there, but she's not a prisoner anymore. She's Dalton's new business partner. You see, she made her own deal, her freedom and protection in exchange for helping him expand his operation." "You're lying," Jack snarled, but doubt crept into his voice. "Am I? Tell me, Mr. Mercer, why do you think the boy was put up for auction in Tombstone specifically? Why do you think you were led here at exactly the right time? Your sister orchestrated the entire thing. She wanted the ledger back, and she used you and the boy to get it." Thomas looked up at Jack with confusion and fear. "Uncle Jack, that's not true, is it? Mama wouldn't do that." Before Jack could answer, a new voice cut through the evening air. "No, she wouldn't." Everyone turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows between buildings. It was a woman in a dusty traveling dress, her long brown hair streaked with premature gray, her face bearing the marks of hardship, but still unmistakably beautiful. "Mama!" Thomas cried out, leaping from Thunder's back and running toward her. Abigail caught her son in a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. "My brave boy! My beautiful, brave boy!" Jack dismounted slowly, hardly daring to believe his eyes. "Abigail?" She looked up at him over Thomas's head, and in her eyes Jack saw forgiveness, love, and a strength that had been forged in the fires of hell itself. "Hello, Jack. I'm sorry I'm late. How did you escape? I had help." She gestured to the shadows, and several figures emerged, women from the garden, all armed and all looking like they'd been through a war. Turns out Dalton's employees don't appreciate being treated like property. When word reached us that you were coming for me, we decided it was time to take our freedom back. Ashford's confident expression cracked. "This changes nothing. I have the ledger, and I have an army." "Actually," Abigail smiled, pulling a familiar leather book from her dress, "you have a fake. Did you really think I'd hide something that important in such an obvious place? The real ledger has been with the territorial marshal for 3 days now. Dalton's entire organization is finished." As if summoned by her words, the thunder of hoofbeats filled the air as U.S. Marshals surrounded the street. Ashford and his men found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. "Marcus Dalton, Vincent Ashford, you're under arrest for human trafficking, corruption, and about 50 other charges," announced Marshal James Crawford as he dismounted. In the chaos that followed, Jack found himself standing with his sister and nephew, watching as the men who had terrorized them for so long were led away in chains. "Abigail," Jack said quietly, "I'm sorry for everything. For not being there when you needed me, for—" She silenced him with a hug that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. "We're family, Jack. That's all that matters now." As the sun set over Tombstone, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jack, lonely Mercer, realized he wasn't lonely anymore. He had his family back, and for the first time in 15 years, he had hope for the future. "So what now?" Thomas asked, looking up at the two adults who meant everything to him. Jack and Abigail exchanged a look, and Jack saw his own dreams reflected in his sister's eyes. "Now," Jack said, lifting his nephew onto his shoulders, "we go home, all of us, together." Whom. And as they walked toward their new beginning, the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one a promise that sometimes, even in the darkest times, love and family can light the way home. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.